Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when the world was already exhausted from war. And then just to keep things spicy, a flu arrived that made everyone afraid to breathe too hard. You're about to trudge through the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, where your odds of survival hinge on whether or not that stranger coughing near you on a train recently visited Camp Devens. If you think the video needs to be improved, don't hesitate to comment below to let me know. If you find this video interesting, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel for new stories for your sleep. There are many interesting stories that I have not told. Thank you. Picture this. It's a dreary morning in late September 1918. You step onto a crowded commuter train somewhere in the northeastern United States. The windows are fogged up. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and damp wool, and you're shoulder to shoulder with men in heavy coats, women in feathered hats, and at least 3 kids coughing directly into the atmosphere. Nobody wears a mask yet. Germ theory exists, sure, but it's more like we heard it's a thing rather than we live by it. You shift your suitcase on the worn wooden bench and sigh. You're on your way to visit a cousin, or maybe you're headed to your job in a clerical office. You don't know it yet, but someone 3 rows down just sneezed pure influenza into the cabin air, and the windows are sealed shut. So, good luck with that. The Spanish flu didn't actually come from Spain. Surprise! Spain was just one of the only countries openly reporting the outbreak since they weren't censoring wartime news. Meanwhile, flu cases were already bubbling up in the US, especially in military bases like Camp Funston in Kansas and Camp Devens in Massachusetts. Soldiers lived in close quarters, shared mess kits, and had little access to soap or time to use it. Historians still argue whether the 1918 flu started in the US, Europe, or China. There's even a theory involving a farm in rural Kansas and a very unlucky pig. Either way, once the flu had a passport carried by young, highly mobile men headed to the front, it went global faster than your aunt's banana bread recipe during lockdown. Back on the train, someone offers you a peppermint. You politely decline. You don't want to seem paranoid, but your throat's been sore since yesterday, and you've developed a very particular suspicion of shared mints. You glance around, half the passengers are sniffling. A man wipes his nose on a handkerchief, folds it neatly, and tucks it back into his coat. You try not to breathe. At this stage in the pandemic, no one's entirely sure what's going on. The flu has hit before. Of course, seasonal flu was common, but this one seems weirder. People are getting sicker, faster. Some develop a bluish tint to their skin. Others seem to recover, only to collapse the next day. You've read about people who died within 24 hours of symptoms. But there's a war going on, and most folks are too busy knitting socks for soldiers to notice a new strain of influenza creeping across the globe. By the time you get off the train and walk to your lodging, a tidy boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Fern who believes in camphor oil and daily oatmeal, the flu is already in your system. You just don't know it yet. You eat supper quietly with the other boarders, listening to the scratchy phonograph in the parlor. Someone's reading aloud a headline, "Influenza Spreading in East Coast CITs." The older gentleman across from you chuckles and says, "It's just a cold with a fancy name." You nod politely, trying not to cough. At night, you lie in a bed with iron bedposts and a lumpy mattress. The gaslight flickers. Somewhere down the hall, a child is crying, and you hear someone else coughing a harsh rattling sound that doesn't stop for minutes. You pull the thin blanket over your shoulders and press your face to the pillow. You don't know it yet, but you've joined one of the largest pandemics in recorded history. Here's a fun tidbit. Some people believed that chewing raw onions could prevent infection. Others thought influenza was caused by bad air and burned sulfur or carried little bags of herbs around their necks. Newspapers offered advice like avoid fatigue and don't worry, which, frankly, sounds like something your doctor says right before sending you home to die. In the days to come, your throat gets worse. Your eyes ache. You develop a fever, but you still go to work because calling in sick isn't really a thing. And your boss is the type who thinks sickness is just a matter of attitude. At your desk, your handwriting starts to slant as your body fights the infection. You drink bitter tea from a chipped mug and pretend not to notice how sweaty your palms are. A coworker gives you a look half concern, half suspicion. And so, the flu spreads. Trains, schools, churches, military barracks, even roller rinks. Yes, roller rinks were a thing. Every public space becomes a vector. One soldier sneezes in a trench near Verdun, another coughs in a dance hall in Philadelphia. You, curled in bed 2 days later, drenched in fever sweat, wonder if that peppermint on the train would have made any difference. You're not alone. This exact pattern of quiet spread, shared breath, and close contact was repeated in thousands of cities around the world. By the time anyone recognized the pattern, it was too late. Still, people carried on. Newspapers kept printing. Streetcars kept running. And you? You wake up one night, lungs aching, trying to remember if you ever told your cousin where you put the extra rent money. You sit up slowly, your body drenched in sweat. The sheets are damp, twisted, and smell faintly like vinegar and old pennies. Your skin prickles with cold despite the fever burning in your chest. Miss S. Fern, your landlady, knocks once and then opens the door holding a chipped mug of broth. She doesn't wear a mask, no one does. Not yet, but her eyes linger a little too long on your flushed face. Just a bit of a chill, you whisper hoarsely, because that's what everyone says. Outside your window, life keeps going. Horse-drawn carriages rattle down the cobblestones, and you can hear the distant clatter of a trolley. There's a bakery 2 blocks away, and the smell of fresh bread almost cuts through the fog of congestion clogging your nose. Almost. The year is 1918, and the world is at war. Technically, it's winding down, but no one knows that yet. You glance at the newspaper beside your bed. Something about the Meuse-Argonne offensive. About American boys charging through the fog and mustard gas in France. There are always boys dying somewhere. It seems, though increasingly, they're dying here at home. Of something far less glamorous than enemy fire. Your body aches as you try to stand. You need to get to work, or the telegram office will dock your pay. Again, you shuffle into your boots, button your vest over your fevered skin, and step out into a city trying to pretend that nothing's wrong. But things are wrong. You can feel it in the way people avoid each other on the street now. No one lingers on stoops anymore. Street preachers have gone quiet. The barber around the corner has posted a sign, closed due to illness. Children who used to skip rope on the sidewalks now stare out from behind lace curtains. And yet there's still a war on. The war effort doesn't pause for influenza. The government is too busy printing Liberty bonds and propaganda posters to bother with coughing civilians. In some cities, officials actually downplay the severity of the outbreak to keep morale high. Can't have folks panicking when boys are dying nobly overseas. Historians still argue whether the U.S. government's wartime censorship made the flu worse by limiting public health communication. What's not in debate is this: people like you, ordinary people, were left to figure it out alone. You'd be forgiven for thinking the real enemy wasn't the virus, but the stubborn machinery of optimism. Your job doesn't offer sick leave, because that's not a thing. You arrive at the office, your coat damp from a weak October drizzle, and see a new face at the desk beside yours. The usual girl, Claire, has gone home. No one says it, but you know what it means. The office is quieter now. The manager, Mr. Dill, insists on open windows for circulation. It's 48 degrees outside. Your fingers go knee typing telegrams, and your lungs feel like they've been filled with wet laundry. Mr. Dill coughs violently into a handkerchief and mutters something about spring allergies. You try not to breathe in. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, people blamed cats for spreading the flu. Yes, cats. Others suspected electricity, or foreigners, or the comet that had recently been spotted in the sky. The explanations were as varied as they were unhelpful, but all had one thing in common: they didn't involve staying home and getting better. Later that day, you faint. Not dramatically. Just quietly tip sideways in your chair like a forgotten marionette. Someone helps you up. You're escorted home in a cab by the office boy, who's wearing his father's oversized coat and offers you a peppermint drop with genuine concern. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Fern prepares you a bath with Epsom salts and whispers to another tenant that you're a touch delicate. You sleep for hours, fitfully, and dream of parades and coughing soldiers and a violinist playing in a hospital hallway. In Philadelphia, across the country from you, a massive Liberty Loan parade had just taken place a week earlier. Packed streets, cheering crowds, confetti falling like snow. 3 days later, hospital beds overflowed. The virus, delighted, partied harder than the parade goers. By the time you wake up the next morning, the war is still dragging on. Your lungs feel like a pair of soaked towels, but you're one of the lucky ones. You're still breathing. Outside, the newsboy shouts about another offensive, another 100 boys gone. It's a strange thing, you think. People are fighting and dying across the ocean for freedom, for peace, for country. But here you are, fighting off a flu no one wants to talk about, in a city that keeps pretending it's not happening. The irony isn't lost on you. The Great War promised a noble death. The flu, on the other hand, just takes your breath, your dignity, and sometimes your entire family without so much as a telegram. One of your roommates doesn't make it. Old Mr. Alcott, who used to hum in the sweet by and by while he shaved, simply stops humming. You hear the landlady ask the milkman for a quiet favor to help move a body. You stay in your room after that. People begin to whisper. You overhear the words Spanish flu more often now, although no one is quite sure why it's called that. Maybe it's the alliteration. Maybe it's easier to blame another country. Maybe we just like naming things after something else, so we don't have to think too hard about what's actually happening. Still, the war drones on. You listen to the radio, to the same patriotic songs and battlefront updates. The music sounds tinny and far away, like it's coming from another world. A world where people aren't afraid of sneezing. You drift back into sleep, the headlines swirling behind your eyes. Influenza death spike. Hospitals plead for nurses. Public urge to remain calm. And you? You try. You wake to silence, not the comforting kind, like snow falling or the hush before a kiss, but the unnerving stillness of a world that's holding its breath. No clatter of carriages outside, no clanging from the blacksmith down the block. Even the milkman's cart, usually a dependable 6 a.m. disruption, is nowhere to be heard. You sit up slowly. The fever has broken, maybe. Or maybe it's just retreated to some corner of your lungs to rest and reload. Your skin feels cooler, but you're weak, so weak that even swinging your legs off the bed takes effort. The air feels thick, like it's been used up by too many people in too small a space. Mrs. Fern leaves food by the door now. She doesn't come in anymore. Yesterday, it was watery rice porridge. Today, it's toast, and what might once have been a boiled egg. There's a note scribbled on the napkin. City says masks now required. Stay inside if possible. Ah, finally. You shuffle toward the window, press your forehead to the cool glass, and see it for yourself. The first proper mask mandate signs. Hastily painted boards nailed to lampposts. A policeman walking the corner with a kerchief tied over his nose like a train robber. A few brave souls in homemade contraptions, some sewn, some crocheted. One woman in what appears to be a child's bonnet pulled tight over her face. Welcome to the mask era. The influenza epidemic is finally being noticed. Sort of. In your city, as in others, officials are reluctantly admitting the truth. And they're doing what officials do best, issuing mandates with the grace of someone trying to catch a barn fire in a teacup. Too little, too late, but it's something. Historians still argue whether early mask mandates were effective or simply symbolic. Cloth masks of the time were loosely woven and poorly understood. Some people swore by them, others called them muzzle masks. What's clear is that compliance was inconsistent. You decide to make one. Everyone's doing it. You dig through your belongings until you find a scarf with moth holes in it and wrap it around your mouth like a sad cowboy. It smells faintly of lavender and mildew. You wear it anyway. Venturing outside feels like crossing into another realm. The streets are nearly empty. Signs hang in shuttered shop windows, closed until further notice or pray for the sick. The movie theater, usually buzzing with life, is dark. Even the church has locked its doors. You never thought you'd miss the sound of pews creaking under someone else's weight. A few businesses are still open, most illegally. Speakeasies that pivoted from gin to quinine cocktails. Bakeries that let regulars in through the back alley. You pass by a barber shop with paper taped to the window. Appointments only. No talking. That one makes you smile. Just a little. You need to stop at the grocer. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Your cupboard contains half a loaf of stale rye and a can of peaches you've been saving for some future celebration that may never come. You bring your scarf mask and a small coin purse. Inside the shop, it's tense. People nod instead of speak. No one lingers. The shopkeeper wears gloves and a bowler hat, but no mask. He coughs once and 3 customers leave immediately. You grab what you can: onions, some turnips, a tin of sardines, and head out as fast as your legs can manage. On your way home, you pass a group of men playing cards on a porch. They don't wear masks. They laugh loudly, slap each other's shoulders, and pass a bottle around like it's a communion chalice. You keep walking. You don't want the bottle. You want answers. But the truth is, no one has them. Not the doctors, not the newspapers, not even the mothers who always seem to know what's best. Theories fly like pigeons in a windstorm. Some say fresh air is the cure. Others recommend garlic, or goose fat poultices, or whiskey by the ounce. A fringe pamphlet lands on your stoop one morning. Banish influenza with harmonious vibration, it reads, and you wonder whether someone actually believes that or is just very committed to the power of humming. Either way, you don't hum. You nap. You sip broth. You wait. You're starting to see more black in the streets now: funeral clothes, mourning veils, armbands of ribbon tied around sleeves, horses pulling carts covered in tarps. No one asks what's underneath. Some cities, like San Francisco, have gotten stricter. Mask wearing is enforced by police. Violators are fined $5 or even jailed. There's a growing tension between personal liberty and public health, and the battle plays out on every sidewalk. You hear two neighbors argue across the fence. One insists the flu is just a strong cold. The other swears her sister died in 3 days flat. You don't interrupt. You just hang your laundry and mind your own shallow breathing. But you notice something odd. With so much fear, there's still laughter. Quiet, cautious laughter. The boarding house has its own little gossip network now, built on muffled voices through walls and notes slipped under doors. Someone swears that the butcher's wife uses onion peels as cough drops. Someone else is convinced that the landlady's cat is immune and secretly hoarding souls. You try to laugh. It comes out like a wheeze. Still, it's better than nothing. A small, cheeky act of rebellion finds you one evening. You paint a tiny smile on your mask in charcoal, like a grim clown. When you go out the next day, a child stares at you, then points, then giggles. But it feels like an offering to the gods of sanity. The newspapers start calling it the second wave. Cases are rising again. Hospitals overflow. Theaters remain closed. Schools are shuttered, and yet the war machine churns on. You pass a recruitment poster on the corner. Your country needs you. It's flaking in the cold, but the soldier's mustache is still sharply painted. You think about how the country could also use more nurses, more medicine, more masks that actually work. But hey, priorities. There's a deepening fatigue to everything now. Not just your bones, but the city itself. Flags droop. Gardens wilt. Hope feels optional. Still, you survive. And in 1918, that's no small thing. You wake to scratching. Not rats this time, those have been oddly scarce, but a pen on paper. Through the thin boarding house wall, someone's writing furiously. Letters home, maybe. Diaries of the damned. You don't know. But there's something oddly comforting about it. The way people keep making sense of the world, even when the world doesn't seem to care much about making sense back. Outside, the leaves are starting to change. Autumn has crept in without asking, bringing with it the promise of colder nights and even colder mornings. You wrap yourself in an extra layer, one that smells faintly of mothballs and someone else's perfume inheritance from a previous tenant who left in a hurry or died. It's hard to keep track. The Spanish flu, as people now insist on calling it, though it neither started in Spain nor appreciated the nickname, is back in full swing. Not that it ever truly left. It just took a breath. Historians still argue whether the summer lull in 1918 was caused by climate, crowd dispersal, or simple statistical fluke. But the second wave hits harder, meaner. You can feel it in the air, the way dogs feel storms before they arrive. The newspapers are trying to catch up. Citizens urged to stay calm. One headline declares, next to a notice about rising death tolls in the city. Another paper insists, this is no worse than a cold. Just before listing symptoms like bleeding from the ears. You sip tea and squint at the contradiction. Your hands tremble slightly. Maybe the fever's not quite gone after all. Mrs. Fern has started leaving clove and vinegar-soaked cloths around the stairwell. Says it kills the air. You say nothing, but you hold your breath every time you pass one. You decide to try and visit someone, just to see if anyone else is still human out there. You put on your charcoal grin mask again and head for the apartment of your friend, Eloise, who once told you a story about sneezing during a séance and being accused of releasing a ghost. Eloise answers the door in a heavy velvet robe and a birdcage veil draped over her face. She looks like a fashionable widow from a silent film. You look like death, she says flatly. You nod. Takes one to know one. You sit 6 feet apart on mismatched chairs, sipping something she calls medicinal port and nibbling dry biscuits. She's kept a journal of the deaths in your neighborhood. Not out of morbidity, she insists, but because someone should. You glance at the list. Names you recognize. Names you don't. Some scratched out halfway, like they died before their second name could be remembered. Eloise sighs and says, there was a time we used to count birthdays. Later that night, you return home to the sound of someone coughing 3 rooms over. It's a wet, hacking sound impossibly human and strangely impersonal at the same time. You don't knock. No one does anymore. Instead, you go to bed with a handkerchief clutched in your fist and dreams filled with quiet trains and faceless nurses. The next morning, you hear the church bells. Not once, but 3 times before breakfast. You're not even sure who they're for anymore. It's become background music. And yet people still go on. The market opens again briefly, with stalls spaced farther apart. One vendor sells only garlic. Another hawks something called flu soap, which smells suspiciously like the soap you already use. Only now, it costs twice as much. You buy a turnip and some dried prunes. The vendor whispers that he can also sell you quinine for strength. You decline, unsure whether you should fear the virus or the snake oil more. Back at the boarding house, the mood is shifting. People are quieter now, less fighting in the hallway, fewer gossip notes. One tenant, a pianist who used to practice every evening, hasn't touched his keys in a week. You miss the off-key waltzes. That night, you lie awake and hear the city breathing, wheezing, pausing. You imagine it like a giant creature sick, old, half asleep, but still alive. The mayor issues new guidelines. More closures, no gatherings, no parades, which is odd, because the war is supposedly almost over. Rumors say armistice is on the horizon, but there won't be crowds in the street or kisses in the square. Not this time. Celebrations will be quiet. Maybe just a candle in the window, if you're lucky. You wonder what it's like to win a war and still feel like you're losing everything. Later in the week, you spot a group of school children walking with their teacher. Each one wears a mask, even the tiny ones with bows in their hair. One child wears his upside down and keeps poking the fabric with a stick. You smile, despite yourself. Life goes on, even if poorly supervised. Historians still argue whether the children of 1918 were psychologically scarred by the pandemic or simply folded it into the chaos of wartime. But you're here now, and you can see it. They're adjusting. Kids always do. One draws a mustache on her mask with charcoal. Another has sewn cat ears onto hers. Maybe it's not resilience. Maybe it's boredom. At the post office, there's a new line reserved for obituaries. You stand in it by accident and have to pretend you meant to be there. The woman in front of you clutches a card with shaky handwriting. She cries without sound. You find yourself blinking too much, then step out of line and walk home slowly, counting your steps as if that could somehow count for something else. Later, in bed, you stare at the ceiling and wonder when it will end. No one has answers, not even Eloise. But you do know this. Things keep going. The world doesn't stop. It just reshapes around the illness, like water around a stone. And you're still here, masked, confused, a little hungry, occasionally amused. But here, and in 1918, that's still enough to be considered lucky. You wake slowly to the morning light filtering through a grimy window pane, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and the sharp tang of disinfectant. The world feels smaller now, contracted to your room, your thoughts, the worn edges of your quilt. Outside, the city moves with a careful tread, as if afraid to wake the invisible enemy lurking in every breath. The second wave is grinding on, and the casualties have become part of the landscape, like street lamps or cobblestones. You no longer flinch when you see an ambulance's muted whistle or a draped stretcher carried down a narrow alley. This is your new normal. You check the calendar pinned to the wall. November 1918. The war is nearly over, the papers say. But the flu, this uninvited guest, refuses to take its leave. You're not alone in feeling trapped. With theaters closed and parades canceled, social life has dissolved into cautious nods through windows and distant waves from across streets. The loneliness curls around your bones like a damp blanket. One morning, you spot a poster taped near the grocer. Support the front, buy war bonds. But no one buys bonds here anymore. The war seems almost like a distant nightmare, eclipsed by the relentless presence of the flu. Your neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Langley, shares stories of the Great War when you meet her briefly by the stairs. She speaks softly of soldiers who never came home, comparing their silence to the eerie quiet left by the sick and dead in the city. You nod, understanding that grief has many forms. In a small, defiant act of normalcy, the bakery down the street reopens just for a few hours each day. You make your way there, clutching your mask, and smell the warm, yeasty scent of bread fresh from the oven. The baker, a jovial man with flour-dusted hands, jokes about how the yeast might be more powerful than any medicine. Historians still argue whether the true toll of the Spanish flu was undercounted because of wartime censorship or overwhelmed medical systems. But the baker's smile reminds you that people find ways to keep hope alive, even if only through a loaf of bread. Back home, you read a leaflet that arrived in your mail slot: How to Prevent Influenza. It suggests washing your hands frequently, avoiding crowds, and keeping windows open for fresh air. You roll your eyes after all. You've been living like a hermit for weeks, but follow the advice anyway. There's comfort in routine, even if it feels pointless. Curiously, some people swear by folk remedies. Mrs. Fern insists on a mixture of honey and whiskey before bed, claiming it soothes the lungs. You try it once. It tastes like a sore throat with a hangover. Still, you keep the bottle on your nightstand, a talisman of sorts. The city's hospitals are bursting at the seams. You hear tales of makeshift wards set up in schools and churches. Nurses work around the clock, faces drawn and eyes haunted. You wonder how they manage to hold the line against such a relentless enemy. You think about the doctors too. Their knowledge is limited. Their treatments often experimental. They tried everything from aspirin to bloodletting, sometimes with disastrous results. Aspirin overdoses became an unfortunate side effect, and historians still debate the extent to which these attempts may have worsened some patients' conditions. In your building, the pianist has returned to the keys, playing slow, melancholic melodies that drift through the halls like whispers. It's the first music you've heard in weeks, and it feels like a fragile thread connecting you to a world before the flu. You receive a letter from a cousin overseas, describing similar struggles in a distant city. Their tone is weary but resolute, reminding you that this pandemic is a shared experience, crossing borders and oceans like the virus itself. At night, as you lie in bed, you reflect on the strange camaraderie that has formed among strangers. People check on each other with small acts of kindness, leaving food at doors, offering words through cracked windows. It's not much, but it's enough to keep despair at bay. Despite the fear and uncertainty, there's an odd resilience in the air. The world is fragile, yes, but it is also stubbornly alive. And so are you. You wake to the faint aroma of burnt toast drifting through your room. It's a small disaster in a world of greater ones, but somehow it makes you feel alive. Someone's kitchen mishap reminds you that life's little frustrations persist, even amid a global pandemic. Outside, the streets are quieter than usual. The usual clatter of carts and footsteps has dulled to a muted murmur. You pull your coat tighter and step outside, feeling the crisp bite of autumn air on your cheeks. The sun is weak, pale, as if shy about showing itself in these dark times. The flu's second wave still churns through the city, a relentless tide that washes away the old and leaves uncertainty behind. You glance at faces passing by, all masked, eyes tired or weary. There's a shared understanding without words. Survival is now the quiet rebellion. At the pharmacy, the shelves are almost bare. Aspirin and quinine are coveted treasures, rationed and guarded like gold. The pharmacist grumbles about supply shortages and patients desperate for cures that don't exist. You buy a small bottle of iodine, a gesture more for peace of mind than actual protection. In the park, the benches sit empty. The children you saw a few weeks ago have vanished, replaced by a few scattered joggers who seem determined not to let the fear steal all their movement. One man walks his dog in circles, the animal oblivious to the invisible threat. You remember reading about how during past plagues, people believed fresh air was the best medicine, a belief called miasma theory. You chuckle softly, thinking how little has changed. Even now, fresh air is a prized commodity, though science would soon prove the flu travels differently. Historians still argue whether the crowded troop transports returning from war zones were the true super spreaders of the virus, or if the pandemic was seeded through global trade routes. But either way, it's clear this invisible traveler has no respect for borders or battle lines. Back at your boarding house, the atmosphere grows heavier. Tenants move with slow, measured steps, conserving energy and hope in equal measure. The landlady, Miss S. Palmer, pins up a list of flu victims in the lobby, a grim ledger that grows daily. You avoid looking at it directly, but the whispered stories leak through the thin walls. Dinner conversations have turned to memories of pre-pandemic dinners, roasts with potatoes, wine poured freely, laughter unmasked and unguarded. Now, meals are often eaten alone, a silent ritual marked by clinking cutlery and the occasional sigh. One evening, you overhear a debate between two gentlemen about the efficacy of masks. Some swear by their protective power, others dismiss them as theater. You know from your own cautious practice that even a little barrier feels like armor. A few tenants share stories of bizarre remedies, rubbing camphor oil on the chest, wearing garlic necklaces, or applying vinegar-soaked cloths under the nose. You smile at the inventiveness, though you stick with the simpler routine of hand-washing and avoiding crowds. In the evenings, the local newspaper prints letters from readers sharing their quarantine experiences. Some are poignant, others humorously resigned. One woman describes her cat's bafflement at the constant hand sanitizer and the strange scent of fear in the household. You think of the soldiers now returning home, many carrying not only wounds, but also the invisible passenger of the flu. Veterans' hospitals are overwhelmed with patients battling both physical and psychological scars. The war may be ending, but the struggle for health and normalcy drags on. You remember stories told by older relatives of the 1918 pandemic's aftermath, the way cities slowly healed, how communities rebuilt, and how the shared trauma shaped generations. There's a strange comfort in knowing this too shall pass, even if not soon enough for those suffering now. Lying in bed, you listen to the muffled coughs and distant sirens. The city breathes with you, fragile, persistent, hopeful. And you fall asleep with the faint hope that tomorrow might bring a slightly brighter dawn. You wake with the muffled sound of coughing seeping through the thin walls of your room. The flu is no longer just an occasional visitor, it feels like it's taken up residence, like an unwelcome house guest who refuses to leave even after you've asked nicely. You sip your lukewarm tea, the taste oddly comforting despite its blandness. Outside, the world has shifted again. You notice more posters around town urging citizens to wear masks properly, to cover both nose and mouth. It's a simple instruction, yet it seems to spark debates on street corners and in homes. Some mask up religiously, others stubbornly refuse, thinking the fuss is overblown. You smile to yourself, humans never change, even when faced with invisible threats. One evening, you overhear a conversation about how some cities enforced mask mandates with fines, even arrests. There's a quiet irony there. A virus that respects no laws met by people who argue over rules. You find yourself wondering what it would be like to live in a time without social media, where information traveled slower, but so did misinformation. Historians still argue whether early government mandates truly slowed the spread or simply shifted the timeline. In your neighborhood, a volunteer group has formed, delivering groceries and medicine to those too sick or afraid to leave their homes. You offer to help, but the fear of contagion keeps you cautious. Instead, you write encouraging notes that volunteers tuck inside packages, little bursts of human connection wrapped in brown paper. The news reports highlight strange and tragic cases, young, healthy adults falling ill and sometimes failing to recover. It's unsettling. The flu doesn't discriminate. It targets those you least expect. You recall reading that the 1918 flu's unusual lethality in young adults is still a mystery. Scientists debate today, possibly due to an overactive immune response known as a cytokine storm. Meanwhile, the city streets grow eerily quiet. Shop windows once brightly lit now display handwritten closed signs. Theaters, schools, and churches stand empty, their doors locked against both contagion and hope. It's strange to see your vibrant city reduced to a hushed ghost town. You think about the workers who remain nurses, doctors, sanitation crews, and grocers. Their bravery is quiet but vital. You overhear a nurse describing her 16-hour shifts, the exhaustion etched deep into her voice. You send a silent thanks to those who keep the wheels turning. In the evenings, radio broadcasts share comforting music and news updates. Sometimes, a cheerful announcer reads poems and stories, trying to soothe the restless minds of listeners confined to their homes. You find yourself looking forward to these moments, a gentle thread tying you to others. One curious rumor circulates about Spanish flu parties gatherings, where people intentionally expose themselves to the virus to gain immunity. You shake your head at the reckless human desire to take shortcuts, wondering if desperation blurs better judgment. Scholars still debate the prevalence and impact of such parties during the pandemic. You take to journaling your daily thoughts, small observations, dreams, and fears. The act feels grounding, a way to reclaim control in an uncontrollable time. You jot down how the quiet city sounds like a lullaby and how the taste of fresh bread feels like a treasure. As you lay down at night, the muffled sounds of coughing fade into the gentle hum of the city settling for rest. You remind yourself that survival is a daily triumph, and that even the smallest kindness can ripple outward. You close your eyes, feeling both the weight of the moment and the fragile thread of hope that tomorrow may hold less fear. You awake to the faint scent of rain seeping through the cracked window frame, the rhythmic tapping against the glass oddly soothing in the stillness. Outside, the sky is a heavy gray, muffling the usual sounds of the city, as if nature itself is pausing to catch its breath. The pandemic has stretched on, wrapping months around you like a slow-moving storm. You move through your days with a new rhythm, one marked by ritual and restraint. Hand washing is no longer a chore but a comforting habit. The warm water a small balm to nerves frayed by uncertainty. You hear that some hospitals have started experimenting with new treatments, oxygen therapy, for instance. Nurses speak cautiously about using tanks and masks to ease breathing difficulties. You wonder how many lives this might save. Yet, at the same time, stories of patients placed in iron lungs circulate, evoking images of trapped bodies fighting for each breath. Historians still argue whether these early respiratory aids significantly changed outcomes or merely offered hope. You stroll past the post office and notice a queue of masked individuals standing apart, clutching envelopes and parcels. The flu has transformed even simple acts like mailing a letter into exercises in patience and precaution. In a rare moment of levity, a street artist paints whimsical murals on boarded-up storefronts, smiling faces, blossoming flowers, and quirky animals. The art feels like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that creativity blooms even in hardship. Local newspapers continue to run obituaries daily, a sobering catalog of losses. But alongside these, you find stories celebrating frontline workers, the heroes in masks who brave exhaustion and risk. Their faces, sometimes covered in bruises from protective gear, appear in grainy photos that evoke both admiration and sorrow. You receive a parcel from a distant relative, inside which are packets of herbal teas and a hand-knitted scarf. The thoughtful gift feels like a warm embrace across miles. You sip the tea slowly, savoring its mild bitterness and the connection it represents. Amid the gloom, you discover new routines. Early morning walks become your sanctuary, silent, solitary, the world washed clean by rain and quiet. You watch leaves fall, each one a soft punctuation in the unfolding story of seasons and survival. You overhear a doctor discussing how influenza viruses mutate rapidly, making it difficult to develop lasting vaccines. This scientific chase seems endless, a race between human ingenuity and viral evolution. Historians still debate the exact origins of the 1918 flu strain, with theories ranging from wild birds to laboratory mishaps. One evening, your landlady hosts a small, masked gathering by the fire, each person sharing their experiences in hushed tones. Stories of loss mingle with moments of gratitude, like the young nurse who found a newborn smile worth every hardship. You learn about the grip parties from the past, where some parents exposed their children deliberately to hasten immunity. The practice seems reckless now, but back then, fear often bred desperate measures. These stories highlight how humanity has long grappled with understanding disease. Your journal entries grow more reflective, pondering how isolation alters perception. Days bleed into nights, and time feels elastic, stretched thin or crumpled tight depending on the mood. Yet you remind yourself that this too is part of the journey. As you prepare for sleep, the rain's steady rhythm calms your thoughts. You breathe deeply, holding on to the fragile thread of hope that one day soon, the sun will shine brighter and the city will stir with laughter once again. You rise to the quiet hum of the city, preparing for another day of cautious endurance. The world outside your window seems more fragile now, every sound amplified in the hush. The flu continues its slow, steady spread, a shadow moving unseen but deeply felt. You notice how people have adapted. Sidewalk chalk marks a 6-foot distance between shoppers waiting outside grocers. The clinking of coins is replaced by paper bills and cautious nods. The social dance has changed, awkward yet strangely intimate in its shared vulnerability. At the market, fruit vendors shout less eagerly, their carts half empty. The bright oranges and apples a muted promise of better days. You pause to inspect the plums dark, juicy, almost defiant in their sweetness against the somber backdrop. Food scarcity whispers at the edges of conversation, a reminder that pandemics stretch beyond sickness to touch every part of life. You recall reading about how the 1918 pandemic affected food supplies worldwide, disrupting farming and trade. Crops rotted in fields as laborers fell ill, while urban areas struggled to keep shelves stocked. Historians still debate how much these shortages contributed to the pandemic's death toll. But it's clear hunger and disease often walk hand in hand. In your building, the communal spirit flickers like a candle in the dark. Mrs. Palmer organizes a small pantry where neighbors donate canned goods for those too weak to shop. It's a quiet rebellion against isolation, a way to say we're in this together without words. You overhear a group discussing the rise of home remedies. Elderberry syrup, honey, even raw onions get a second chance in kitchens worldwide. These traditions, passed down through generations, offer comfort even if their scientific efficacy is uncertain. One evening, you attend a mass gathering over the radio airwaves, where storytellers and musicians broadcast from their homes to lonely listeners. The airwaves carry the sound of a violin, soft and yearning, and tales of faraway places untouched by flu. It's a balm for restless souls craving connection. You find yourself fascinated by how public health messaging evolved. Early on, posters warned against spitting in public, a surprisingly revolutionary act at the time. Cough etiquette became a new social norm. You smile at the thought of how humanity's habits are shaped by such small but vital changes. Doctors debate the usefulness of quarantine measures, with some cities closing schools and theaters, while others leave them open. Historians still argue whether these actions were more symbolic than effective, but the collective effort is undeniable. You take comfort in small routines, morning stretches, journaling, the occasional letter to a faraway friend. Each act feels like planting a seed of normalcy in a disrupted world. As night falls, the city is quieter than before. You close your eyes to the soft rhythm of distant footsteps and gentle coughs and drift into sleep, cradled by the fragile hope of healing days ahead. You wake with a faint ache in your limbs, a reminder that the flu has become a quiet companion to many. The morning light filters softly through thin curtains, casting gentle patterns on your worn floorboards. The world feels paused, yet the undercurrent of unease hums just beneath the surface. You head outside, careful to avoid the usual bustling spots. Instead, you find solace in the city's parks, now eerily empty save for a few masked joggers and the occasional dog walker. The trees sway lazily in the spring breeze, petals drifting like fragile whispers. Nature seems indifferent to the human plight, a comforting paradox. At the edge of the park, you meet an elderly man who shares stories of the 1918 flu, his voice steady and tinged with nostalgia. He speaks of makeshift hospitals set up in schools and churches, where beds line the halls and nurses work tirelessly. The image is stark, yet infused with quiet heroism. You recall that during the pandemic, many communities transformed public spaces into emergency wards. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these improvised hospitals, but agree they symbolized resilience and adaptability amid crisis. In the marketplace, you notice how commerce has shifted. Cashiers behind glass shields scan goods while customers maintain distance. You find yourself intrigued by the ingenuity of merchants who began offering home deliveries or leaving goods on porches to avoid contact. A peculiar tale catches your attention of a nurse who reportedly used crocodile dung as a sunscreen and antibacterial agent, a practice passed down from ancient Egyptian remedies. While the connection to the flu is tenuous, such stories reveal humanity's resourcefulness and belief in natural cures. However, unusual. You think about the masks woven from gauze or silk, sometimes embroidered with delicate patterns. They are both shields and symbols, reminders of the invisible enemy and the collective effort to protect each other. You wonder how many of these masks were treasured family heirlooms or hastily made by loving hands. The city's rhythm remains uneven. Factories and mills operate with skeleton crews. Streets are quieter, yet emergency vehicles pass with persistent urgency. You listen to radio broadcasts filled with updates, advice, and occasional humor-gentle reminders to wash hands and stay hopeful. You find yourself reading letters sent by soldiers overseas, many of whom fell victim to the flu before ever seeing battle. Their words, filled with longing and hope, offer a poignant glimpse into lives cut short or forever changed. You come across debates among doctors about whether the flu's severity was worsened by the 1918 war's conditions, overcrowded trenches, poor nutrition, and stress. Historians still argue how these factors intertwined with viral evolution to create such a deadly pandemic. As dusk settles, you sit by your window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The flu may have stolen so much, but it also revealed stories of courage, sacrifice, and human connection in unexpected places. You sip your tea slowly, savoring the momentary peace before surrendering to sleep's gentle embrace. You wake to a cool morning light slipping softly through your window, the world outside subdued and still. The pandemic's long shadow lingers, casting quiet ripples across daily life. You prepare for the day with familiar rituals, finding comfort in small certainties amid uncertainty. You walk through the neighborhood and notice the subtle ways people have adapted. Shops display handwritten signs urging patience. Neighbors wave from a distance instead of close embraces. And children play quietly in backyards, their laughter muffled by masks. You overhear a conversation about flu parties, a now outdated concept where parents intentionally expose children to the virus, hoping to build immunity. It seems reckless now, but you understand it was born from desperation and limited medical knowledge. Historians still debate how widespread and effective these gatherings really were. You visit a local pharmacy, where the pharmacist carefully counts out bottles of quinine and aspirin, both popular remedies at the time. While quinine was originally used to treat malaria, people believed it might help ease flu symptoms. Aspirin, on the other hand, was a go-to for fever and pain, though historians still discuss whether early overuse contributed to some fatalities. You think about how the flu affected gender roles. Women often became primary caregivers, balancing household duties and nursing the sick, sometimes at great personal cost. Meanwhile, men who were drafted into the war were particularly vulnerable to the virus. This shift created new social dynamics still being explored by scholars today. You wander to the corner where an old woman sells homemade masks, each one stitched with delicate embroidery and infused with lavender for a soothing scent. It's a quaint contrast to the grim reality. The masks represent a small act of kindness in a fearful time. You learn about Spanish flu funerals, often brief and somber affairs, held with only immediate family to prevent further spread. The silence and absence of community gatherings leave a hollow space in collective grieving. Yet, some families found creative ways to honor loved ones, planting flowers or lighting candles at home. A surprising fact emerges: some places reported fewer flu deaths than others, possibly due to factors like humidity, population density, or even cultural habits like greeting without physical contact. Historians continue to investigate these variations, searching for clues in an elusive puzzle. You reflect on the impact on children's schools were shuttered, and many kids missed months of education. Some parents turned to homeschooling or improvised lessons, creating an informal learning environment that varied widely in quality and access. As night falls, you listen to a soft jazz record someone left on a neighbor's porch, the mellow notes floating through open windows. The music seems to ease the tension, a gentle reminder of joy amidst hardship. You settle into bed, feeling the weight of a world altered but not broken, and slowly let the quiet darkness carry you into rest. You wake gently to the soft light of dawn filtering through thin curtains, the distant call of a morning bird offering a small comfort. The world remains tinged with unease, yet life's rhythms continue to pulse softly beneath the surface. You find yourself wandering down quieter streets, observing the subtle signs of a community adapting. Neighborhood notice boards are plastered with health advisories and encouragements to stay vigilant. A few brave souls have set up small gardens in empty lots, cultivating vegetables as both sustenance and solace. The local newspaper reports on curious scientific studies emerging. One experiment attempts to measure whether sunlight can inactivate the influenza virus, a hopeful sign that natural forces might offer some defense. Historians still debate how much environmental factors influence the pandemic's progression. You pause to watch a group of children practicing spaced-out games in a park, their laughter muffled by cloth masks. Their resilience is striking, as is the inventive way they've turned a grim reality into a shared experience. You think of how future generations might view these moments as acts of quiet bravery. You learn that many doctors began wearing improvised protective gear beyond masks, goggles fashioned from swimming glasses, gloves pieced together from household items. Their dedication is both heroic and heartbreaking, battling an invisible enemy with limited resources. You visit a local bakery where the smell of fresh bread wafts warmly through the air. Despite rationing and shortages, bakers work tirelessly to supply comfort food. You sample a crusty roll, marveling at how such simple pleasures become profound during times of hardship. You overhear a conversation about the W-shaped mortality curve of the 1918 flu, where unusually young adults suffered high death rates, unlike typical seasonal flus that target the very young and elderly. This perplexing pattern remains a topic of intense study and debate among historians and epidemiologists. You reflect on the pandemic's impact on mental health. Stories surface of anxiety, grief, and loneliness becoming widespread. Yet, communities found ways to support each other, whether through letter-writing campaigns, shared poetry, or quiet acts of kindness. An intriguing tale catches your attention. In some areas, flourishing fevers were reported brief periods when patients seemed to recover suddenly, only to relapse. Medical understanding of such phenomena was limited, fueling ongoing scholarly debates about the virus's behavior. You find solace in evening walks, watching street lamps cast long shadows on wet pavement. The city feels suspended between fear and hope, each day a step closer to the unknown future. As you prepare to rest, you sip a cup of chamomile tea, its gentle warmth settling through your body. You let the soft sounds of the night lull you towards sleep, wrapped in the quiet resilience of a world slowly healing. You wake to the quiet hum of morning, the world still softened by lingering shadows and gentle light. The city's pulse feels fragile but steady, a rhythm born of resilience and tentative hope. You stroll past shuttered theaters and closed cafes, their windows adorned with handwritten signs that read, "We'll be back soon." It's a silent promise, a collective breath held until better days return. The pandemic's grip has forced the world into an unnatural pause, yet creativity finds ways to bloom in the quiet. You discover a community bulletin where people exchange advice on coping with quarantine blues. From knitting to gardening, from writing letters to long walks, the suggestions reveal a shared desire for connection despite physical distance. Historians still explore how such social adaptations influenced recovery and morale. At a nearby pharmacy, you learn of the curious use of eucalyptus and menthol to ease breathing remedies borrowed from traditional medicine. While not cures, their soothing effects offered comfort to many. You marvel at the blend of old and new knowledge converging in these strange times. You overhear a story about a nurse who kept a diary, chronicling her days in a crowded hospital ward. Her entries reveal moments of despair balanced by humor, a joke shared over a meal, a patient's unexpected smile. It's a human portrait behind the statistics, a reminder of life persisting amid crisis. You reflect on the role of music and radio broadcasts, which became lifelines for isolated individuals. Popular songs of the day, gentle ballads, and even comedy sketches filled the airwaves, offering brief escapes. The pandemic accelerated the importance of mass media in connecting people, a phenomenon still being unpacked by historians. In a park, you watch a solitary figure practicing Tai Chi, movements slow and deliberate. The practice, with its focus on breath and balance, seems perfectly suited to these times. You wonder how ancient health traditions provided solace alongside modern medicine. You consider the varied government responses. Some cities implemented strict lockdowns. Others favored more lenient measures. Historians continue to debate which strategies saved the most lives and how public compliance influenced outcomes. A surprising detail catches your attention. During the flu, some animals, like domestic cats and dogs, were thought to be less susceptible, though cases did occur. This raised early questions about cross-species transmission, a topic still relevant today. As night falls, you find yourself humming a lullaby popular among children, then a gentle melody passed down to soothe fears and ease restless minds. You settle into bed, feeling the day's weight lift slowly. The world outside remains uncertain, but within you, a quiet calm grows, ready to carry you gently into sleep. You wake slowly to a gray, misty morning, the kind where the edges of the world seem softened and distant. The pandemic's shadow still hangs, but today there is a subtle shift, a fragile thread of hope woven through the day's fabric. You find yourself reflecting on the spread of information during the 1918 flu. Without the internet or social media, news traveled by newspapers, word of mouth, and the occasional bulletin board. Misinformation was common, but so were heartfelt attempts to educate the public about hygiene and prevention. Historians still argue how much these efforts influenced the pandemic's trajectory. You stroll past makeshift clinics and abandoned factories repurposed as emergency hospitals. You imagine the tireless workers, doctors, nurses, volunteers who staffed these places, often at great personal risk. Their dedication created a patchwork of care in a world stretched thin. You come across a quiet memorial plaque tucked into a city park honoring those lost to the flu. The simplicity of the tribute contrasts with the massive toll the virus took, a reminder that grief is often personal even amid global tragedy. You learn about immunity certificates, a concept where recovered patients were issued documents to return to work or social life. The idea was progressive but flawed, as the science of immunity was still in its infancy, and the certificates sometimes created social divides. You watch children playing hopscotch with chalk markings spaced widely apart, a whimsical adaptation to social distancing. Their laughter is a soothing balm, a gentle defiance against the pandemic's gloom. You reflect on how art and literature responded. Poets wrote verses capturing the pandemic's melancholy and hope. Painters created scenes of empty streets and quiet moments, all contributing to a cultural record historians continue to study. You overhear a conversation about the long-term effects of the flu, including reports of lingering fatigue and neurological symptoms in survivors. These post-viral conditions puzzled doctors then and remain an area of ongoing research today. You consider the unique challenges faced by marginalized communities, often hit hardest due to poverty, overcrowding, and limited access to healthcare. Their stories, too, form an essential part of the pandemic's history, though often underrepresented. As dusk settles, you light a candle and sit quietly, feeling the flickering flame mirror the fragile hope kindling in the world. You prepare for sleep, carrying the day's quiet lessons and stories with you into the gentle night. You wake to a calm, clear morning, the light gentle and steady as it spills through the window. The air feels fresher somehow, as if the world is exhaling after a long-held breath. The pandemic's grip has loosened, though its memory lingers in every corner. You reflect on the aftermath, how societies slowly piece themselves back together, learning from loss and hardship. Public health systems were reshaped, with lessons embedded deeply into future preparedness. Historians still argue about the pandemic's precise impact on social and political change, but its influence is undeniable. You wander through a bustling market where vendors and customers reconnect cautiously. Fresh produce, fragrant spices, and homemade goods fill the stalls, a sensory reminder of life's persistence and renewal. You recall stories of survivors, those who endured and found new purpose. Some became advocates for public health reform, others simply returned to daily life with gratitude and resilience. You notice children playing freely, their masks tucked away, their laughter ringing louder than before. It's a subtle victory, a symbol of hope springing anew. You think about the cultural shifts, the arts, music, and literature that blossomed in response, transforming grief into expression and community into celebration. You hear whispers of ongoing scientific inquiry, how the pandemic spurred advances in virology and epidemiology, knowledge that informs responses to outbreaks even now. You find comfort in the small rituals of healing, community gatherings, storytelling, and quiet remembrance of those lost. As night descends, you settle beneath soft blankets, the world outside calm and gentle. You close your eyes, carrying the weight of history and hope mingled together. Slowly, your breath eases, the mind quiets, and you drift into peaceful sleep, wrapped in the enduring human spirit that carries us through even the darkest times. The world, in all its vastness and complexity, has faced challenges like this before, and it will face them again. But for now, rest is your gift, soft, healing, and profound. Let the echoes of history fade into quiet, like a lullaby sung across centuries. Feel the gentle comfort of time's steady march, and know that tomorrow is waiting with its own stories, its own light. Now, breathe deeply. Feel your body soften and your thoughts drift like clouds on a slow-moving breeze. The night embraces you, calm and steady. Let yourself go,